Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Darkness. Gather round and try to stay in the light. Some of the others from the dark aren't quite as civil as I am, and I hate cleaning up that mess. Mom's gut saved us from Bad-Eyed Dimples. I was only a baby when this happened. This is my mom's story. A bit of background. My mom had me pretty young. She was 21 and she was not married. Her and my dad were only dating when I was born, and she was about 22 when this whole thing occurred. They both went to the same church with friends they had met in high school. Louise, Christine, and Quill. My mom was riding in Quill's car at the time. I was a 1-year-old in the back seat. Mom took me everywhere. Everyone was heading towards a church event that they were all excited for. Louise, my dad, and Christine were all in separate cars, but they trailed Quill because they were all heading to the same place anyway. At some point, my mom and Quill were stuck at a stoplight. They were chatting until my mom says that she got this uneasy feeling. She never had a problem with people keeping their doors unlocked, but she couldn't shake how she felt at the moment. Finally, she spoke up, requesting what she suddenly felt was necessary. "Hey, Quill?" "Yeah?" "Lock the doors." Quill was confused. It was an odd thing for my mom, the monarch of never locking doors, to ask. "What? Wait, why?" "I don't know. I just have a feeling about it." Quill did not object, locking the doors just as my mother asked. The light went green and everyone drove on. It wasn't until the next stoplight that my mom and Quill both experienced something that made them glad they locked the doors. As they sat there, chatting away, these two guys from a car next to them got out of their vehicles. Mind you, we are on a road with a bunch of other people next to us, so these guys must have been high or drunk as balls. Quickly, they make their way over to Quill's car, one on each side. They began to feverishly pull on the door handles, trying desperately to get it open. My mom and Quill screamed. They were still at a stoplight and couldn't move without hitting the cars next to them. After realizing that my mom's door didn't work, one of them went for the door closest to me. He tried to open it with all his might, until him and his douchebag buddy started to try and break the windows. Thankfully, the light turned green, and Quill sped them out of there. My mom and Quill were both in shock. Christine called them, freaking out because she had seen the whole thing from a couple of cars behind. She asked them if they were okay, which, although being in shock, they weren't harmed. My dad called her and told her that he and Louise were going to handle it, which my mom believed, and they all went on their way. To this day, my mom says that she still doesn't know what my dad and Louise did to the guys. My dad said he found them, but that's all he would ever say about it. Louise acted similarly, not speaking of what happened. Even after my parents got married and got divorced, she doesn't have a clue. The Trap, from Jonathan Q. This happened a few years ago while I was still in my hometown. I was going for a late-night walk in the early morning, which was fairly common, and I always felt relatively safe and street-smart to avoid bad situations. My walks would often take me all over town, though a favorite haunt was a park we had down by the river. Though it was known as a hangout spot for weirdos and druggies so late. I've walked there plenty of times and never encountered any problems, so I went down there again all the same to enjoy the breezy river air. The walk to the park itself was uneventful, and so we'll get to the anatomy of the park itself, something vital to realize the magnitude of the issue. The park was unfenced and easy to get into, open to the public, and looking from the park itself you could see an opening to the beach and the river along it. There needed to be an opening because the beach was a bit of a drop-off. You had to take a moderate step down from the concrete supporting the park itself just to get onto the sand. And away from this opening, the disparity between the concrete steps and beach became such a length that they needed fencing so as to prevent people from falling and hurting themselves. Basically, everywhere not beach led to a major drop-off into only a sparse line of sand or muddy area, with the only thing separating you from the drop was either fencing or a major tree line. So as I'm walking through the park, there's nobody around, and it's absolutely silent, until the hooting of an owl breaks it. I'm surprised, because owls were rare in those parts and at that time of year. But I ignore it and continue my walk as it continues hooting. As I meandered closer to where it sounded, I noticed two things: that the owl sounded like it was in pain, and that it was on the ground. I get really concerned for it and want to help it, so I start going over to where the hooting is coming from, though tentatively, because even right then a weird chill climbed up my spine, though I couldn't say why. I get closer, and it sounds louder, more hurt, and is definitely on the ground in the same place. I keep walking closer, and I hear it right behind the tree line after the drop-off point. For more of the park's layout, anywhere past the tree line led to a drop that was just a thin line of earth separating you from the water, like a gorge. If you jumped down, you were relatively stuck, because you couldn't go forward for the water. Climbing back out was nightmarish for all the roots of trees jutting out, and going left or right would have forced you to follow an extremely narrow path with little room. This owl was right behind the drop-off point, so even getting closer, I couldn't see it. The owl kept hooting, and I got to right in front of the trees, and I could hear it right under me. All I had to do was jump down, and I would see it and be able to get it. But I didn't. The weird feeling, this chill up my back, kept getting higher and higher and more intense the closer I got, and my conscious brain finally picked up on why. I started counting, and when I reached 10, it hooted. I continued, and when I reached 10, it hooted. It sounded again, and again, and again. And I finally realized why I felt so creeped out, and why my subconscious brain was screaming at me to run away. It wasn't an owl. It was a recording of a wounded owl on the ground, waiting for anyone to come with the intention to help it. Past a tree line obscuring their vision, past a drop-off point you couldn't climb back up from, and on a path you couldn't run in at all, where someone, anyone, could be waiting. It was a lure, meant to lead someone into a trap, and I suddenly felt very, very cold and clammy, and like I was being watched. I immediately turned and started speed walking away, taking the nearest exit out of the park and onto as many lit streets as I could, all the way home, constantly checking to see if I was being followed. I stayed up the entire night, fully paranoid and looking out all of the windows so I could see if anyone was there, though nothing bad ever did happen and no one ever tried to get me. The next night, I went back with my sister's cell phone with the intent to call the police and report it if I heard it again, but no hooting ever occurred, and upon a more thorough inspection, nobody seemed to be lying in wait. I kept an eye on the newspapers for a bit after that too, to check if anyone else reported similar happenings, or, God forbid, if anyone got hurt in a similar incident. But nobody ever did, and it never happened to me again. That's the end of my story, and while I do continue to take night walks, I always carry a weapon on me to defend myself, and always make a point to trust my instincts. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear more. If you would like to have your story narrated, you can send it to storiesofdarkness55@gmail.com. And as always, pleasant dreams.